The vulture landed not 10 feet away, its baleful red eyes fixed on Samuel Thornton, with the patient certainty of inevitable death. 5 others circled overhead, black silhouettes against the merciless blue sky. With a grunt of defiance, Samuel grabbed a fist-sized rock and hurled it at the nearest scavenger. The stone fell short, but the bird hopped back, momentarily startled by the dying man's resistance. Not today. Samuel rasped, his voice cracking from thirst. He spat a mouthful of dust at the circling shadows. Not like this. Anna's voice echoed in his memory, clear as the day she'd spoken the words 20 years ago. Her hand, already wasted by consumption, had gripped his with surprising strength. "Promise me something, Samuel," she'd whispered. "Don't just survive after I'm gone live. Build something that matters. Leave the world better than you found it," he'd promised. For 20 years, he'd carried that promise like a talisman, along with the silver locket containing her portrait. Yet now, abandoned in this desolate wasteland, he was failing her in the most fundamental way, by dying without purpose, without legacy, without having built anything that would outlast his bones. 6 hours since the wagon train had disappeared over the western horizon. 6 hours of broken prayers and bitter memories that lacerated deeper than the sun's brutal rays. Samuel fumbled for the ancient flintlock pistol at his side, his final companion in this desolation. One shot. One final act of defiance against a fate more cruel than his 73 years had prepared him for. The betrayal replayed in his mind with knife-edge clarity. Wagon master Charles Preston's cold eyes, sizing up Samuel's swollen knee, calculating its cost against the train's schedule. The murmured excuses from men who'd shared his campfire for 2,000 miles. Women who couldn't meet his gaze as they hurried children into wagons. And Jebediah God, that cut deepest, his apprentice of 15 years, a man he'd loved like a son, silently helping to pile the pathetically inadequate supplies they'd left him with. 1 canteen, 3 days hardtack, a threadbare blanket. We can't risk falling behind schedule for one man. Preston had pronounced with that clipped Eastern accent that made every word sound like the verdict of a hanging judge. Winter comes early in the mountains. I'm sorry, Samuel. Sorry, as if the word could soften a death sentence. Samuel forced himself onto his elbows, wincing as fire shot through his knee. 50 years he'd served as the wagon train's blacksmith. Half a century of mending their broken wheels, forging their tools, telling stories to their children around evening fires, all erased by a single moment of physical weakness. 73 years on this earth. He whispered to the indifferent sky, "And this is my reward." Cast aside like a broken hammer, a dark laugh bubbled up from his parched throat, quickly dissolving into a hacking cough that left him dizzy. The bastards had even taken his water filtration kit, claiming community property. Preston knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't just abandonment, it was execution by proxy, a coward's murder that kept blood off respectable hands. The closest vulture hopped closer, emboldened by Samuel's weakening resistance. He grabbed another rock and hurled it with all his remaining strength. This time, it connected, striking the bird's wing. It squawked and retreated, offended by its meal's unseemly persistence. The sound of shifting gravel jerked Samuel from his bitter defiance. His fingers tightened around the flintlock's grip. If it was bandits, they'd be doing him a favor, a quicker end than dehydration. If it was a mountain lion, well, he'd take one with him at least. But what emerged from behind the rocky outcropping wasn't either. The figure moved with predatory grace, yet absolute purpose, stopping 30 paces from where Samuel lay. Burnished copper skin stretched over high cheekbones. A single eagle feather adorned the warrior's black hair, and vermilion streaks of ochre painted his chest in patterns Samuel couldn't decipher. The Lakota carried a rifle, but it pointed at the ground. Samuel tried to raise his pistol, but his arm trembled so violently the weapon nearly slipped from his grasp. Death had simply changed its costume, trading the vulture's black feathers for a man's form. "If you're gonna scalp me," Samuel croaked, "at least have the decency to shoot me first." Something flickered across the warrior's impassive face, not quite amusement, but a recognition of the old man's defiance. He approached slowly, each step deliberate, until he stood over Samuel. For a long moment, the Lakota simply studied him, head slightly tilted, as if trying to understand what manner of creature he had found dying in the wilderness. Then, without a word, he knelt and uncorked a water skin, raising it to Samuel's cracked lips. Water-blessed, life-giving water poured into Samuel's mouth. He drank with desperate greed until the warrior pulled it away, shaking his head. Too much too quickly would only make him sick. Why, Samuel managed to whisper, genuinely bewildered by this mercy. The warrior touched his own chest. "Silent Elk." Then he pointed toward the western horizon, where the wagon train had disappeared, and made a dismissive gesture accompanied by a sound of disgust. In that moment, understanding passed between them that transcended language. The Lakota had witnessed his abandonment, and despite generations of bloodshed between their peoples, he recognized the cruelty for what it was, a violation of something fundamental, something that went deeper than the divisions of race or history. "Samuel," the old man replied, touching his own chest with a trembling hand. "Samuel Thornton." Silent Elk nodded once, then turned and whistled softly. From behind the rocks appeared a second horse, riderless. With surprising gentleness, the warrior helped Samuel to his feet. Pain exploded through Samuel's knee as he tried to put weight on it, and he bit through his lower lip to keep from crying out. The taste of his own blood mingled with the lingering blessing of water as Silent Elk half carried him to the waiting horse. As the Lakota helped him into the saddle, Samuel caught a final glimpse of the western horizon. Storm clouds were gathering there, massive thunderheads building above distant plains. And beneath them, somewhere, the wagon train continued its relentless push toward the mountains, toward a destiny that suddenly seemed entwined with his own, in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. "They left me to die," Samuel said, needing to speak the truth aloud to make it real. Silent Elk's dark eyes met his. "You live," he replied in accented English. "They die." He gestured toward the gathering storm. "Unless," the word hung between them, pregnant with possibility. "Unless fate intervened? Unless someone intervened." The implications made Samuel's head swim, or perhaps that was just the dehydration taking its final toll. As Silent Elk mounted his own horse and led them eastward, Samuel felt consciousness slipping away. His last coherent thought carried neither bitterness nor vengeance, but a strange, wild hope. Perhaps Anna's final request hadn't been in vain after all. Perhaps death had never been coming for him at all. Samuel's integration into the Lakota camp was neither swift nor easy. His first weeks passed in a haze of pain and fever, his body rebelling against the trauma it had endured. Graybird, the tribe's ancient medicine woman, treated his injuries with herbal poultices and bitter teas while regarding him with obvious suspicion. Silent Elk alone seemed to believe Samuel deserved a place among them. "Why you help white man?" Samuel overheard Graybird demand of Silent Elk one evening as they spoke outside his teepee. "White eyes bring only death." Silent Elk's reply was too soft to hear, but the old woman's derisive snort carried clearly. "He will betray," is white man's nature. Yet, as Samuel's strength returned, so did his determination to prove her wrong. He began with small tasks, mending cooking pots, repairing knife handles, reinforcing metal components of saddles. Simple work, but work that slowly earned grudging acceptance from the tribe. He built a small forge at the camp's edge, using stones and deer-hide bellows. The rhythm of hammering metal became his voice when English and halting Lakota failed him. Through his craftsmanship, he spoke of gratitude, of respect, of a desire to contribute rather than take. One afternoon, as the first frost painted the prairie with silver, Silent Elk approached, leading a paint horse with a damaged bit. "Metal breaks," the Lakota explained. "Strong horse, weak metal." Samuel examined the broken piece with a craftsman's eye. "I can make it better than it was." As he worked the forge, Silent Elk settled nearby, watching with evident interest. They had developed an unlikely friendship built on mutual respect and the gradual exchange of languages and ideas. "Why called Silent Elk?" Samuel asked as he hammered the red-hot metal. A rare smile touched the warrior's face. "As boy I hunt elk, stand still like stone from sunup to sundown." His eyes took on a distant quality. "Once great elk stag passed so close his breath warmed my face. He looked at me, I looked at him. Neither moved. Finally he turned away, chose to let me live." The smile deepened. "Elders say I have spirit of elk, patient, watching, silent." "Good name, suits you." "Why your people leave you?" Silent Elk asked suddenly. "You are elder, have wisdom, make things others cannot." Samuel's hammer paused mid-strike. "They fear winter in mountains," he answered after a moment. "I slow them down." He resumed hammering, trying to mask the emotion that still surged when he spoke of it. "To them, I am tool with broken handle. No more use." "Strange way." Silent Elk said, genuine confusion furrowing his brow. "We value elders. They carry our stories, our ways." "The white men value different things," Samuel replied. "Speed, youth, what you can produce." He quenched the metal, sending up a cloud of steam. "When you can't keep up, you're left behind." "Not good way," Silent Elk said simply. "No," Samuel agreed. "Not good way at all." They fell into companionable silence as Samuel finished the repair. When he handed the reinforced bit to Silent Elk, the warrior examined it with approval. "Stronger now," Samuel said. "Won't break again." Silent Elk nodded. "Like you. Broken, then stronger." Before Samuel could respond to this insight, the warrior added, "Man whose spirit breaks cannot be reforged. You bend, not break." The observation struck Samuel with unexpected force. Before he could respond, commotion erupted from the edge of camp. 3 riders appeared at full gallop, Lakota scouts returning from a long-range patrol. They spoke rapidly to the gathering crowd, their voices urgent, their gestures pointing westward. Silent Elk listened intently, his expression darkening with each word. Finally, he turned to Samuel, his eyes grave. "The Wagon people," he said. "Your people, in great danger." Samuel's heart constricted despite himself. "What happened?" "Storm came. Big storm. Wagons trapped in pass of standing stones." Silent Elk paused, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "And Snake watches them." "Snake. Bad white man." Half face burned away. Silent Elk traced a line from his forehead to his jaw. "Once soldier, now leads Wolf Clan. 30 men who live by stealing, killing. They wait like wolf pack watches wounded buffalo." Samuel's blood ran cold. This wasn't just any bandit. This was Snake Rawlins, whose reputation had preceded the wagon train all the way from St. Louis. A former cavalry officer, court-martialed for massacring a peaceful Apache village, he'd escaped hanging and turned to banditry. Stories claimed half his face had melted in a fire when vengeful Apaches caught up with him years later. "How far to this pass?" Samuel asked, his smith's hands clenching unconsciously. 3 days hard ride. Samuel understood immediately. With the wagons stranded in a narrow pass facing early winter storms on one side and Snake's cutthroats on the other, the settlers were doomed. All of them. Men, women, children. Even those who had cast him out without a second thought. "They will die," he said flatly. "All of them." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them as the implications settled. Finally, Silent Elk spoke the question, that hung in the air like smoke. What would you do? They left you to die. Samuel's gnarled hands, clenched and unclenched, a lifetime of values, warring with the fresh wound of betrayal. In his mind's eye, he saw not Preston's cold face, but little Emily who had sat beside his campfire, night after night, entranced by his carved wooden toys. He saw young Sarah Caulfield, widowed in St. Louis, who had shared her precious coffee with him when his arthritis flared. They did. He acknowledged the words like stones in his mouth. But there are innocents among them, children who had no say. He met Silent Elk's evaluating gaze. And Winter doesn't care about justice. Well, why help them? Silent Elk pressed his eyes boring into Samuel's. Why not let your God judge them? Samuel's hand went instinctively to his shirt pocket where Anna's locket lay against his heart. Her final request echoed in his mind, build something that matters. Leave the world better than you found it, because you helped me when you had every reason not to. Samuel answered finally. Because mercy isn't earned, it's given precisely when it isn't deserved. Would I build anything of value if I turned my back on them now? Something like respect kindled in Silent Elk's eyes. He reached out and gripped Samuel's shoulder, a warrior's acknowledgement. I will speak to council, he said. Tell them your words. The council debated through the night. By dawn, their decision was made. 10 warriors would accompany Samuel to the Pass of Standing Stones. But first, they would visit Spirit Cave, a sacred place, where, according to Silent Elk, they would find medicine for the journey. The cave revealed itself on the evening of their first day's travel, a narrow opening in a sheer cliff face. Inside, the walls were covered with ancient paintings that seemed to shift and move in the flickering torchlight. In the chamber's center, the warriors built a small fire and performed a ritual involving chanting and sacred herbs cast into the flames. Samuel found himself drifting between wakefulness and something deeper. Visions came. Anna, his father's forge, the endless prairie. Then darker images, the wagon train abandoning him, vultures circling Preston's cold eyes. Most disturbing was a vision of Jebediah, huddled in darkness, writing a note that he attached to an arrow before shooting it toward an unseen recipient. The image was so vivid, so specific that Samuel gasped aloud. Was this memory premonition, or simply his own fears taking shape in the smoke? What did you see? Silent Elk asked later as they prepared to sleep beneath the stars. Samuel hesitated. I'm not sure what was real and what wasn't. The Lakota nodded as if this was expected. Spirit Cave shows many paths. Some that were, some that might be, some that fear creates. He studied Samuel carefully. Consider what path you would take if all you saw is true. With that cryptic advice, Silent Elk left Samuel to his troubled thoughts. Sleep came slowly, haunted by the lingering question. Had Jebediah truly betrayed his companions? And if so, what would Samuel do when they faced each other again? Dawn of the third day found them approaching the Pass of Standing Stones, a narrow canyon named for the eerie rock formations that stood like sentinels along its length. From a high vantage point, Samuel and Silent Elk surveyed the situation below. The wagon train had indeed been trapped, forming a defensive circle at the pass's narrowest point. 2 wagons with broken axles created a bottleneck that prevented the others from advancing or retreating. More concerning were the small campfires dotting the ridges surrounding the pass, at least 4 separate positions where Snake's men had established observation posts. How many bad men? Samuel asked, scanning the distant fires. Silent Elk's eyes narrowed as he counted. 30, maybe more. Too many to fight directly. I need to examine those wagons up close, Samuel said. Find Jebediah. The vision from Spirit Cave still troubled him. I'll approach after dark. As night fell, Samuel prepared for his descent. Silent Elk painted 2 red streaks across his face for protection and offered him a sip from a ceremonial flask that burned like liquid fire down his throat. Then vision water. Silent Elk explained. Helps see true path in darkness. Samuel moved silently down the rocky slope, navigating by the faint glow of campfires and remembering Silent Elk's lessons on stalking. The cold air carried the first hint of snow, confirming Graybird's prediction of an approaching storm. They would need to move quickly. As he neared the canyon floor, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A solitary figure slipping away from the wagon circle toward the western edge of the canyon. The man's tall, lanky silhouette was unmistakable, even in darkness. Jebediah. Samuel's blood ran cold as his vision from Spirit Cave flashed through his mind. He followed at a careful distance, tracking his former apprentice up a narrow deer trail that led toward one of Snake's observation posts. When Jebediah halted in a small clearing, Samuel crept closer, straining to hear. A rough voice broke the silence. "You're late, blacksmith." From the shadows emerged a figure that made Samuel's skin crawl, a massive man with half his face a mass of twisted scar tissue. In the moonlight, his ruined features looked like melted wax, and the skin pulled tight and shiny. His remaining eye gleamed with malevolent intelligence, while the other was a milky orb sunk deep in a crater of scar tissue. Around his neck hung a macabre necklace of what appeared to be human finger bones, yellowish-white against his dark coat. "I couldn't get away sooner," Jebediah replied, barely above a whisper. "They've doubled the guards since yesterday." Snake spat. Preston finally showing some sense. Is he too late for that? He circled Jebediah like a predator, sizing up prey. "You bring the map." Jebediah produced a folded paper from inside his coat. "The route you asked for. There's a side canyon 1/2 mile east. It leads to a ridge overlooking their position. You could bring men down behind them." Samuel's fists clenched in rage. The betrayal was real worse than he'd imagined. "Good," Snake said, examining the crude map. "And Preston, his leg's still bad." "Worse. Fever comes and goes. He won't last another week without proper medicine." Snake's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Perfect. Now about your payment." "I don't want payment," Jebediah cut in. "Just passage to California. Safe passage, like you promised." "Of course," Snake replied smoothly. "You've been most helpful, unlike Preston." His voice hardened with venom. The mighty Captain Preston, so righteous, so sure he was better than me. Now look at him, broken, helpless, abandoned by his army friends. Samuel's eyes widened at the bitter personal hatred in Snake's voice. This wasn't just banditry, this was vengeance. "That you knew him before?" Jebediah asked, voicing Samuel's thought. "We served together in the Apache campaign." Snake's hand drifted to his ruined face. "He testified against me at the court-martial. Said I gave the order to burn that village. Said I laughed while women and children burned." His voice dropped to a whisper. He was right, of course. But he was there too. He watched, did nothing. Then took his captain's bars and his clean conscience back east. The pieces fell into place in Samuel's mind. This wasn't random banditry, this was calculated revenge. Snake had been tracking Preston's wagon train from the beginning. I swore on my ruined face that Preston would die screaming. Snake continued, his voice suddenly flat and cold. That he'd watch everyone he cared about suffer first. That he'd know the same helplessness he felt watching that village burn, except this time there'll be no testimony, no court-martial. Just justice. My justice. Jebediah's head dropped, shame evident even in silhouette. Just be quick with the others. No need for suffering. Snake's laugh was chilling. There's always need for suffering, blacksmith. Especially for Preston. I've waited years for this. Samuel had heard enough. He began to retreat, a mind racing with the implications. His foot dislodged a small stone that clattered down the slope. Both men below froze. Someone's there. Snake hissed, drawing a pistol. Check it. Samuel didn't wait to be discovered. He scrambled back down the trail, his injured knee threatening to buckle with each step. Behind him, he could hear Jebediah's voice, calling out, pretending to be a sentry on patrol, giving Samuel precious seconds to escape. By the time he reached the canyon floor, his heart was pounding and his knee throbbing mercilessly. But the urgency of what he'd learned drove him forward. He approached the wagon train from the east side, careful to stay in the deepest shadows, until he was within 50 yards of the closest sentry. "Hello, the camp. Don't shoot. Friend coming in?" The sentry's rifle snapped up. "Stop right there. Identify yourself." "Samuel Thornton," he replied, raising his hand slowly. "Former blacksmith to this train." A stunned silence followed. Then, "That's impossible. Thornton's dead." "I'm not dead," Samuel replied, stepping forward cautiously. "Just abandoned, and I've come with a warning." The commotion drew others. A lantern approached, illuminating a face. Samuel recognized Sarah Caulfield, the young widow who had joined the train in St. Louis. "Mr. Thornton," she gasped, raising the lantern higher. "Is it really you?" "It is Mrs. Caulfield." He lowered his hand slowly. "And we don't have much time. You're all in grave danger." Her face hardened with determination. "Come with me, quickly." As she led him into the circle of wagons, faces turned toward him in shock and disbelief, the ghost they never expected to confront again. Some looked away in shame, others stared openly, and a few approached with halting apologies that Samuel acknowledged with curt nods. "I need to see whoever's in charge," he said urgently. "Snake Rollins is planning an attack for tomorrow night, and you have a traitor in your camp." Sarah's eyes widened at this. "Preston's been injured. I've been speaking for the group. Who's the traitor?" Before Samuel could answer, a familiar voice called his name. Jebediah was pushing through the crowd, his face a mask of astonishment that Samuel instantly recognized as false. "Samuel, my God, it's really you. How?" "Save it." Samuel cut him off coldly. "I heard you with Snake. I know what you've done." Jebediah froze, the blood draining from his face. The crowd around them fell silent, processing this accusation. "What is he talking about, Jebediah?" Sarah demanded. "He's confused," Jebediah stammered. "Delirious. Look at him dressed like a savage, face painted. He's lost his mind out there." "I followed you," Samuel said, his voice steely. "Heard every word. The map you gave him. The attack planned for tomorrow night. Your safe passage to California while everyone else dies." A murmur of shock and anger rippled through the gathering crowd. Jebediah's eyes darted frantically, seeking escape. "It's not I was trying to—" He broke off, then suddenly lunged for a rifle leaning against a nearby wagon. Before he could reach it, two men tackled him to the ground. "Bind him," Sarah ordered, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "We'll deal with him later." She turned to Samuel. "Mr. Thornton, we need to know everything you saw and heard." Samuel quickly related what he'd witnessed, including Snake's personal vendetta against Preston and the planned attack route. The settlers listened in growing horror. "We're trapped," someone muttered. "No way out now." "There is a way," Samuel countered. "But I'll need to see those broken wagons. And I haven't come alone." Sarah's eyes widened. "Not alone who?" "Lakota warriors." Samuel replied calmly, watching the shock ripple through the gathered settlers. 10 of them led by a man named Silent Elk. They saved me when my own people left me to die. Now they've come to help save all of you. The reaction was immediate and predictable: fear, disbelief, outright rejection from some. "Indians," an older man spat. "They'd slaughter us all." "They would have every right to," Samuel replied sharply. "But instead they've risked their lives to come here. So tell me who's shown more Christian charity in this tale, the Lakota, who saved a stranger, or those who abandoned one of their own?" The rebuke landed with visible impact. Shame flickered across many faces. "We've no choice. Sarah said finally, silencing the murmurs with a raised hand. If what Mr. Thornton says is true, Snake plans to attack tomorrow night with overwhelming force. We need allies, whatever form they take. After arrangements were made to signal the Lakota, Samuel insisted on seeing Preston. Inside a wagon near the center of the circle, the once commanding wagon master lay on a makeshift bed, his face ashen and gleaming with sweat, his broken leg elevated on a pile of blood-stained blankets. "Preston," Samuel said quietly. The man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening with disbelief. "Thornton, am I dead then?" "Not yet," Samuel replied, though not for lack of trying on your part. Preston closed his eyes briefly. "You survived. How?" "The Lakota found me, saved me, and now they've come to save all of you." Samuel leaned closer. "Especially you, Preston. Snake Rollins is out there, and he's come specifically for you." Preston's face went even paler at the name. "Rollins, impossible. He was court-martialed, sentenced to hang. He escaped, and he's been tracking you. This isn't random banditry, it's vengeance. For the Apache campaign, for your testimony." A bitter laugh escaped Preston's cracked lips. "God's justice, then. The sins of the past returning." What happened?" Samuel asked. "The real story." Preston's eyes took on a distant quality. "We were ordered to pacify the region. Apache raids had the settlements terrified. Rollins, he took the orders further than anyone intended. Burned a village. Women, children." His voice faltered. "I didn't give the order, but I watched it happen. Did nothing to stop it." "And you testified against him?" "Yes, to save myself." The admission seemed to physically pain him. "I received a commendation. Rollins got the noose." Preston's feverish eyes found Samuel's. "And now he's come to collect the debt." "Now he has," Samuel agreed. "But you're not going to pay it today. We're getting everyone out of here if you'll accept help from the people you've spent a lifetime fearing." Preston stared at him for a long moment. "You've come for revenge, then? To watch me grovel for help from Indians and the man I abandoned?" Samuel considered this. The thought had indeed crossed his mind during the journey, the satisfaction of seeing Preston's face when he realized who his rescuer was. But standing here now, looking at the broken man before him, Samuel found the anticipated pleasure hollow. "No," he said finally. "I've come because innocent people shouldn't die for your sins or mine." The parallel to his own abandonment hung unspoken between them. Hate is a luxury for those with time to spare. We have none. Preston's gaze held his. Then he said what Samuel never expected to hear. "I've dreamed of you every night, Thornton, standing in the desert watching us leave. Your eyes follow me into sleep." His voice cracked. "I was wrong. God help me, I was wrong." The raw confession hung in the air between them. Samuel had come prepared for defiance, for coldness, not for this broken admission of guilt. "We're consolidating the wagons," Samuel said after a moment, his voice professional, betraying nothing of the turmoil within. "Leaving the damaged ones behind. The Lakota will help us find a hidden path out of this trap." As he turned to leave, Preston spoke again, his voice barely audible. "Thornton, I don't deserve your help. But thank you." Samuel paused at the wagon's entrance. "You're right. You don't." He looked back at the man who had condemned him to die. "Remember that when you look at my Lakota friends? None of us deserves mercy. That's why it's so precious when it comes." Outside Silent Elk, and 3 warriors had already entered the camp, and their arrival causing a mixture of fear and desperate hope among the settlers. Samuel joined them quickly, explaining the situation and Jebediah's betrayal. "Snake plans to attack through a side canyon," he concluded. "We need to be gone before tomorrow night." Silent Elk nodded gravely. "There is another way." He pointed to a narrow gap in the canyon wall, barely visible in the darkness. Hard path, steep, but hidden from Snake's eyes. Gray Bird, who had arrived with the warriors, studied the canyon wall with knowing eyes. "Sky spirits angry," she observed in her halting English. "Big snow coming soon. Must hurry." Samuel looked up, noticing for the first time the heavy cloud cover that had moved in, obscuring the stars. The air carried the metallic taste of approaching snow. If a blizzard caught them in the open, even the Lakota's guidance might not save them. "We work through the night," he decided. "Leave at first light." The night dissolved into organized chaos. Under Samuel's direction, the settlers began consolidating their essential possessions into the sturdiest remaining wagons. Samuel worked at the makeshift forge, reinforcing axles and creating metal braces for critical components. Around midnight, little Emily found him at the forge. She stared at him with the unnerving directness of childhood, clutching the wooden doll he had carved for her months earlier. "Mama said you died in the desert," she said matter-of-factly. "But you came back." Samuel wiped sweat from his brow. "I didn't die, Emily. I just found a different path. I kept Molly safe," she said, holding up the wooden doll. "Even when Mama said to leave her behind, 'cause we didn't have room." Her eyes found his suddenly wise beyond her years. "It's not right to leave people behind, is it, Mr. Samuel?" Something shifted inside him, a softening of a hardness he hadn't realized he still carried. "No, Emily," he replied softly. "It's not right at all." Silent Elk approached, having overheard. He knelt to Emily's level, his intimidating warrior's presence gentling as he addressed the child. "In my language," he said, "children are wakanyeja, sacred beings. All warriors protect sacred beings, no matter whose they are." He offered her a small carved horse fashioned from pale wood. "For strong heart." The simple exchange, a child bridging two worlds without hesitation, brought an unexpected tightness to Samuel's throat. As he watched Silent Elk's expression shifted briefly, a shadow of old pain crossing his features. "You have children?" Samuel asked later as they worked side by side, reinforcing a wagon wheel. Silent Elk went perfectly still, his hands freezing on the metal he was holding. For a long moment he said nothing, and Samuel thought he wouldn't answer at all. "Had?" The warrior finally said, his voice so quiet, Samuel barely caught it. "Son, daughter, wife." His eyes remained fixed on his work, but something had changed in them, a depth of sorrow that hadn't been visible before. 7 winters ago, white soldiers came to our winter camp. We had no weapons. We flew white flag. Samuel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What happened?" "They fired anyway. Said we raided settlement. We did not." Silent Elk's hands resumed their work steady despite the emotion evident in his voice. "My son died in my arms. My wife and daughter, I found later. I'm sorry." Samuel whispered the words hopelessly inadequate. "For many moons, I hunted white men, killed many, took scalps." Silent Elk finally looked up, meeting Samuel's eyes directly. "Then one day, I found old white man in desert, left to die by his own people. And I saw—" "What?" Samuel asked when Silent Elk didn't continue. "That hate is circle with no end. Someone must break circle." The warrior's gaze was intense, almost uncomfortable in its directness. "This is why I help you help them. Not for them. For circle to end." The revelation stunned Samuel. All this time, Silent Elk had carried this burden, this profound reason to hate white settlers. Yet he had saved Samuel, had convinced his tribe to risk their lives for the wagon train. The magnitude of that mercy, knowing what had been done to him, was almost incomprehensible. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Samuel asked. "Would it have changed your path?" Samuel considered this. "No, but it would have helped me understand yours." Silent Elk nodded once accepting this. "Now you understand. Now we finish work." The conversation ended there. But its impact resonated within Samuel throughout the night. By dawn, 4 wagons had been prepared for the journey, loaded with essential supplies, and strengthened with Samuel's metalwork. The weakest and most vulnerable children, the injured Preston, and 2 elderly couples would ride, while everyone else would walk alongside. The first light of dawn revealed a troubling development. Snowflakes had begun to fall light and sporadic now. But the heavy clouds promised much worse to come. Graybird studied the sky with concern. "Big snow coming," she repeated. "Spirit caves showed me. White death from above." The news added urgency to their departure. Silent Elk gathered the group for final instructions, pointing to the distant ridgelines where his warriors waited. "When sun touches mountaintop," he indicated a specific peak to the east. "They begin diversion. You must move quickly then." His gaze swept over the settlers. "Path is narrow, dangerous. Follow exactly. One mistake." He drew his finger across his throat in universal meaning. As the eastern sky lightened, Samuel found himself standing alone at the edge of the camp, watching snowflakes thicken in the early morning light. The weight of what they were attempting pressed upon him, guiding an entire wagon train through a treacherous mountain path, while evading bandits and racing an oncoming blizzard. The chances of success seemed vanishingly small. Doubting, Graybird's voice came from behind him. The old medicine woman had approached without sound. "Being realistic," Samuel replied. "Many things must go right. Many things can go wrong." Graybird snorted. "This is life. Always." She joined him in watching the falling snow. "You feared dying alone in desert. Found new family instead. Now you fear saving old family." Her ancient eyes met his. "Fear is fog. Hides true path." Before Samuel could respond, and the first ray of sunlight struck the mountain peak Silent Elk had indicated, almost immediately, war cries echoed from multiple directions, followed by plumes of smoke rising from strategic locations on the surrounding ridges. "It begins," Graybird said with quiet certainty. The diversion worked better than they had hoped. Snake's men scrambled in confusion, clearly visible on the distant ridges, as they responded to what appeared to be an attack from multiple directions. Meanwhile, the wagon train moved with quiet urgency toward the hidden passage Silent Elk had identified. The narrow trail was even more treacherous than it had appeared from a distance. The first wagon barely squeezed through the entrance, its wooden sides scraping against stone with an ominous groan. Draft horses strained against their harnesses, eyes rolling with fear at the unfamiliar terrain and the intensifying snowfall. Samuel positioned himself at a critical juncture where the path made a sharp turn up a rocky incline. Here, each wagon would need extra hands pushing from behind to make the ascent. His knees screamed in protest as he braced himself against the back of the first wagon, adding his strength to the collective effort. The second wagon contained Preston and the other injured settlers. As it approached the difficult turn, Samuel caught a glimpse of the wagon master's face through the canvas opening, pale, drawn with pain, but alert. Their eyes met briefly, an entire conversation held in a single glance. No words were necessary. By the time the third wagon had navigated the turn, the snowfall had thickened considerably, reducing visibility and making the already treacherous path even more dangerous. The rocky ground had become slick with accumulating snow, threatening to send wagons sliding toward the precipitous drop-off mere feet away. "Carefully now," Samuel called as the fourth and final wagon began its ascent. "Steady." Suddenly, a deep rumbling sound echoed through the canyon, drowning out even the howling wind that had begun to accompany the snowfall. Samuel looked up in horror to see a cascade of rocks and snow breaking loose from the ridge above them, a landslide triggered by the vibrations of the wagons, or possibly by one of Snake's men. "Avalanche," he shouted. "Move, move." The deadly cascade thundered down the canyon wall, gathering speed and destructive power with each tumbling boulder. The fourth wagon's driver whipped his horses frantically, trying to clear the danger zone. But the wagon moved agonizingly slowly up the steep incline. Without thinking, Samuel raced back down the trail directly toward the oncoming avalanche. He reached the struggling wagon and added his strength to the effort, pushing from behind with desperate urgency. "It's going to hit us." Someone screamed as the first rocks began striking the ground nearby, sending up explosions of snow and stone shards. The main force of the avalanche struck just yards behind them, obliterating the trail they had just traversed. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, and a massive cloud of snow and pulverized rock engulfed them in choking whiteness. When the dust settled moments later, they found themselves cut off the trail behind them, completely buried under tons of debris. The path ahead still passable, but damaged. They were committed now. There was no going back. As they pushed forward, a shout went up from behind them. Through the thickening snow, Samuel could make out riders entering the gap in the canyon wall. Snake's men had discovered their escape route despite the diversions. "We've been found." Sarah called out, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "They're coming." Silent Elk's warriors materialized from concealed positions along the ridgeline, firing arrows, and the occasional rifle shot to slow the pursuers. But the bandits were numerous and determined, advancing steadily despite the resistance. The fourth wagon had sustained damage in the avalanche, a cracked axle that threatened to give way completely with each passing yard. They were still 100 yards from the relative safety of the plateau where the other wagons waited. "We'll never make it." The wagon's driver shouted as a wheel struck a rock and the axle groaned ominously. Samuel scanned the narrow trail ahead, his blacksmith's mind rapidly calculating stresses and breaking points. "We need to brace that axle, or it won't last another 50 yards. As he moved to examine the damage more closely, a bullet splintered the wood beside his head. He ducked instinctively, scanning the trail behind them. Through the curtain of snow emerged a massive figure on horseback, Snake Rollins, his ruined face somehow more terrifying in the diffuse light of the snowstorm. His remaining eye gleamed with malevolent purpose as he raised his rifle for another shot. Behind him rode at least a dozen men each, armed and closing fast. "Thornton," he roared, his voice carrying even through the howling wind. "Where's Preston? Get everyone to the plateau," Samuel shouted to Sarah. "I'll hold them here." "You can't face them alone," she protested. "Go," he insisted, pulling his flintlock pistol from his belt. "Get those people to safety." As Sarah reluctantly hurried ahead with the damaged wagon, Samuel took position behind a large boulder, using it for cover against the approaching bandits. His ancient pistol was a pitiful defense against so many armed men, but he had to buy time for the others to reach safety. Snake dismounted 20 yards away, motioning for his men to spread out. "I know you're there, old man," he called. "Come out and tell me where Preston is, and I might let you live." "You're lying, Snake," Samuel called back. "You don't let anyone live." A harsh laugh echoed off the canyon walls. "You know me too well already, but I'll find Preston with or without your help. The only question is how many have to die first." Samuel risked a glance around the boulder. Snake's men were advancing on foot now, using the rocky terrain for cover as they worked their way up the trail. He took careful aim with his flintlock and fired at the closest bandit, who fell with a cry of pain. One shot. Now he was defenseless, except for the heavy wrench at his belt. "That all you got, old man?" Snake taunted, having seen the single shot. "One bullet? Enough for one of you," Samuel replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt, as he retreated further up the trail. If he could just keep them occupied long enough for the wagons to reach the plateau, Suddenly movement caught his eye, a figure emerging from behind the bandits. To his shock, he recognized Jebediah, whom he'd thought safely bound in the wagons. The young man must have escaped in the confusion of the avalanche. But what was he doing? Jebediah moved with surprising stealth, a large rock clutched in his hands. Before Samuel could process what was happening, his former apprentice brought the rock down hard on the back of one bandit's head, then grabbed the man's fallen rifle. "Samuel, run!" Jebediah shouted, firing wildly at Snake's men, forcing them to dive for cover. Snake whirled in surprise, then raised his own rifle and fired in one fluid motion. Jebediah staggered, but remained standing, blood blossoming across his chest. "Traitor!" Snake snarled, advancing on the wounded man. "I should have known you'd turn on me too." "Samuel." Jebediah called, his voice weaker now. "Get to the others, I'll hold them here." Samuel stood frozen in disbelief. The man who had betrayed the wagon train was now sacrificing himself to save it. Before he could respond, Jebediah fired again, the bullet striking perilously close to Snake, forcing him and his men back into cover. "Go!" Jebediah cried with what strength remained. "I have to make this right." Making his decision, Samuel turned and ran up the trail as fast as his injured knee would allow. Behind him, he heard more gunfire shouts, and then an ominous silence. Jebediah had bought them precious minutes with his life. Whatever his earlier betrayal, he had died attempting redemption. Samuel reached the damaged wagon just as its axle gave a final catastrophic crack. The wagon listed dangerously to one side, threatening to topple over the edge of the narrow trail into the abyss below. "Brace it!" Samuel shouted, diving for the failing wheel. He wedged his shoulder under the wagon bed, his legs braced against slippery rock, taking the weight on his body as women and children scrambled to safety from inside. Silent Elk appeared beside him, adding his strength. "Cannot hold long," he warned, his muscles straining visibly. Samuel's mind raced. The wheel couldn't be repaired here. They needed to either abandon the wagon or find a way to stabilize it enough to reach level ground 50 yards ahead. "The metal braces," he grunted to Sarah. "In my tool bag, and rope all you can find." As she rushed to gather the supplies, more gunfire erupted from below. Snake and his remaining men had overcome Jebediah's desperate stand and were advancing again now, just 100 yards behind them. "No time." Silent Elk warned, his face grim, as bullets ricocheted off the stone walls around them. Samuel made a split-second decision. "Get everyone off the trail, up to those rocks." He nodded toward a defensible position ahead where the other wagons had already gathered. "I'll finish this." Silent Elk looked ready to argue, but recognized the determination in Samuel's eyes. With a short nod, he began guiding the remaining settlers forward, leaving Samuel alone with the crippled wagon and the approaching bandits. Working with desperate speed, Samuel secured metal braces to the failing wheel hub and wrapped rope around the entire assembly. It wasn't a proper repair, but it might hold long enough to reach safety. "That's the best I can do," he muttered, wiping frozen sweat from his brow. With no one to help push, he'd have to rely on the terrified horses to pull the wagon clear. "Hiya!" he shouted, slapping their flanks. The horses strained against their harnesses, muscles bunching under snow-dampened hides. The wagon groaned, shifted, and began to move forward, inch by painful inch. Samuel stayed with it, guiding the makeshift repair over the rough terrain when a bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded through his upper body, hot blood soaking his buckskins almost instantly. He staggered but remained upright, clutching his wounded shoulder as he turned to face his attacker. Snake Rollins stood 20 yards away, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency despite the brutal cold. His ruined face was a mask of hatred, his single eye fixed on Samuel with predatory intensity. "Where's Preston?" he demanded again, advancing slowly. "Tell me, and I'll make your death quick." Samuel glanced behind him. The wagon was still moving slowly uphill, almost to safety now. If he could just buy a few more moments. Preston's dead. He lied, blood seeping between his fingers as he pressed his hand against his wounded shoulder. Died of fever yesterday. You're too late, Snake. Liar. Snake snarled, closing the distance between them. He drew his hunting knife, the blade gleaming wickedly in the diffuse light of the snowstorm. I'll find him, and he'll die screaming. But first you. As Snake lunged forward, Samuel dodged slower than before due to his injuries, but still quick enough to avoid the knife's first pass. He backed away, searching desperately for a weapon. His hand closed around a heavy wrench from his tool belt just as Snake attacked again. The bandit was unnaturally strong, his body hardened by years of violence and survival in the wilderness. The knife slashed across Samuel's forearm, opening a second wound that immediately began to bleed crimson against the white snow. You people, Snake spat as they circled each other on the narrow trail. With all your talk of civilization and morals, you're weak. The strong take what they want in this world. Samuel's breathing was labored blood loss and exertion taking their toll. But he kept his voice steady as he replied. Is that why half your face is gone, Snake? Because you're so strong. The taunt hit home. Snake roared in fury and charged, knife extended. Samuel sidestepped again, but his injured knee chose that moment to buckle. He went down hard on the snow-covered ground, the wrench spinning from his grasp. Snake was on him instantly, knife raised for a killing blow. Die knowing Preston will follow you soon, old man. As the knife descended, a war cry split the air. Silent Elk appeared from nowhere, tackling Snake with such force that both men went rolling dangerously close to the edge of the trail. The Lakota warrior had doubled back to help Samuel despite the risk to his own life. The two men grappled in the snow, each fighting for control of the knife. Snake's greater weight gave him advantage, and he slowly forced the blade toward Silent Elk's throat. Despite his wounds, Samuel crawled toward his fallen wrench, every movement sending waves of agony through his shoulder. His fingers closed around the cold metal just as Snake gained the upper hand, pinning Silent Elk beneath him. With the last of his strength, Samuel swung the wrench at Snake's head. The impact made a sickening sound, and the bandit slumped sideways, momentarily stunned but not unconscious. Silent Elk scrambled free, retrieving his knife from where it had fallen during the struggle. Snake was recovering quickly, shaking his head to clear it, reaching for his own weapon again. For my family, Silent Elk said softly and drove his knife into Snake's chest. The bandit's single eye widened in shock. He looked down at the handle protruding from his body, then back up at Silent Elk. A bubble of blood formed at the corner of his mouth. Preston, he gasped, the hatred still burning in his gaze. I will not die by your hand, Silent Elk finished. Snake's body went rigid, then collapsed. His remaining eyes stared sightlessly at the snow-filled sky. The vendetta that had driven him finally ended. Silent Elk helped Samuel to his feet. His men retreat, he said, gesturing down the trail, where the remaining bandits were indeed falling back, demoralized by their leader's death. Must go now. Storm grows. Samuel nodded weakly, leaning heavily on his friend. The combination of blood loss, cold, and exhaustion was taking its toll. The world seemed to be receding, growing dim around the edges. The wagon, he managed to say. Safe, all safe. Silent Elk guided him up the trail. Now you too. The final 100 yards to the defensive position where the others waited seemed endless, the blizzard now in full force around them. When they finally reached it, Samuel collapsed against a boulder, his strength finally giving out. Through a haze of pain and exhaustion, he was vaguely aware of Graybird kneeling beside him, with herbs and bandages, of Silent Elk organizing the warriors for a rear guard action, of Sarah directing the settlers to prepare for the storm's full onslaught. Snake is dead, he managed to tell Sarah when she approached. Jebediah, too. Her face showed a complex mix of emotions at this news, relief, sorrow, confusion. Jebediah betrayed us. But you said he fought them at the end. He did. Samuel confirmed, wincing, as Graybird applied a poultice to his shoulder wound. He chose differently when it mattered most. Graybird spoke urgently to Silent Elk in their native tongue. The warrior's expression changed, and he turned to Samuel. "She knows place, not far. Cave big enough for all." He hesitated. "Sacred place. Medicine cave? Normally White Eyes not welcome, but Storm Spirit leaves no choice." Samuel nodded his understanding of both the offer and its significance. "We would be honored by such shelter," he replied formally. Within minutes, the wagons were moving again, following Graybird's confident lead despite the near-zero visibility. The old medicine woman moved through the blizzard with uncanny certainty, as if she could see paths hidden to everyone else. After an hour of grueling travel, the promised shelter appeared a massive cave mouth, partially hidden by wind-sculptured snowdrifts, but large enough to accommodate the entire party wagons and horses included. As they filed inside, the temperature rose noticeably, the howling wind reduced to a distant moan. The cave extended deep into the mountain, its walls adorned with ancient pictographs that seemed to move in the flickering light of hastily lit lanterns. Near the center of the main chamber, a natural chimney allowed them to build fires without risk of smoke suffocation. But most remarkable was the ethereal blue light that emanated from deep crystals embedded in the cave walls, a ghostly illumination that cast everything in an otherworldly glow. The effect was both beautiful and unsettling, as if they had stepped into a realm between worlds. "Ancestor spirits," Graybird explained, noting Samuel's wonder at the phenomenon. "They watch always, judge hearts." She gestured to where the blue light seemed strongest. "Sacred pool there, healing waters." With Graybird's guidance, Samuel was helped to the underground pool where his wounds were bathed in water, so cold it burned, yet somehow eased the pain almost immediately. The old medicine woman chanted softly as she worked, applying fresh poultices and bandages with practiced hands. "You bleed much," she observed, "but live, strong spirit." That night, as the blizzard raged outside, an impromptu council formed around the central fire. Sarah speaking for the settlers, Silent Elk for the Lakota Samuel. Somewhere in between the bridge that connected two worlds. "We owe you our lives," Sarah said simply to Silent Elk. "All of us." The Lakota warrior acknowledged this with a dignified nod. "What will you do when storm ends, winter comes?" "Mountains dangerous." Sarah looked to Samuel, who had been pondering this very question during his convalescence. "There's a sheltered valley 3 days' ride from here," he said. "Silent Elk knows it. Good water game for hunting protection from storms. We could winter there, continue to Oregon in spring." "But that's Indian territory," one of the settlers objected. "They won't want us settling there permanently." "No." Samuel agreed. "Not permanently, but for the winter." He glanced at Silent Elk. The warrior was silent for a long moment, considering. "The valley has space for many," he said finally. "If you respect our ways, follow our guidance for winter survival, perhaps." Graybird completed the thought, her ancient voice carrying surprising strength. "Perhaps two peoples learn from each other. Share knowledge." Her eyes found Samuel's. "Build bridges." A murmur ran through both groups, uncertainty, possibility, fear, hope, all mixed together. "It won't be easy," Samuel warned, looking from settlers to Lakota and back again. "Generations of mistrust don't vanish overnight. But what alternative do we have? Separately, the winter might claim us all. Together, we have a chance." Preston, who had been carried to the council on his stretcher, spoke up unexpectedly. "Listen to Thornton," he said, his voice weak but clear. "I was wrong about him. Wrong about many things. Don't make my mistakes." His public admission sent a ripple of surprise through the settlers. Samuel studied the man who had condemned him to die, and saw something he hadn't expected: genuine remorse, and perhaps the beginning of wisdom. Silent Elk rose to his feet, commanding everyone's attention. "My people have reason to hate White Eyes," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the cave. 7 winters ago, soldiers killed my family, my son, my wife, my daughter. He paused, allowing the revelation to sink in. For many moons, I killed white men for revenge. The settlers shifted uncomfortably, many avoiding his gaze. But Silent Elk continued, his voice unwavering. But hate is circle with no end. Someone must break circle. He gestured toward Samuel. This man was cast out by his own people, left to die. He could hate. Instead, he builds. His eyes swept over the gathered faces, Lakota and settler alike. "We can all build, or we can all die in winter's teeth. Choose." The simplicity and power of his words hung in the air. After a long silence, Sarah stood. "We choose to build," she said firmly. Together. 3 months later, Samuel stood at the edge of the winter camp, watching the first tentative signs of spring emerge from the snow-covered valley. Behind him, the unlikely community had not just survived, but begun to flourish in ways none could have predicted. The settlers had contributed their technical knowledge, improved methods of construction tools, agricultural techniques. The Lakota had shared their profound understanding of the land, where to find food in the harshest conditions, how to predict weather changes, which plants could heal and which could harm, not without conflict, of course. Cultural misunderstandings, old prejudices, and the simple friction of different ways of life had created tensions that sometimes threatened to tear the fragile alliance apart. But each time, cooler heads had prevailed, often with Samuel serving as the mediator, the bridge between worlds. Thinking deep thoughts, old friend. Silent Elk approached, carrying 2 steaming cups of pine needle tea. Wondering what happens next. Samuel admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "Spring is coming. Many will want to continue to Oregon." Silent Elk nodded. "And others will stay." He gestured to where a mixed group of children played together near the central fire, Emily among them. In just 3 months, they had created their own pidgin language, a blend of English and Lakota that allowed them to share games and stories. Seeds planted in young hearts grow strong. Samuel smiled at the sight. They'll remember this winter their whole lives. It will change how they see the world. "And how do you see world now, Samuel Thornton?" Graybird's voice came from behind them. The old medicine woman had approached with her characteristic silence. Different from Desert Day. Samuel considered the question carefully. He reached into his buckskin shirt and withdrew 2 items that hung around his neck: Graybird's medicine pouch and Anna's silver locket. With careful fingers, he opened the locket to reveal the small, painted portrait of his wife. For 20 years, he had carried her image close to his heart, a talisman against loneliness. Now, for the first time in decades, he could look at her face without the accompanying pang of failure. "Anna always said that a life should be measured by what you build, not what you take," he said softly. "I spent too many years after her death just existing. Building wagons, yes, but not building anything that mattered." He looked out over the valley where settler and Lakota dwellings stood side by side. She would have understood what happened here. How being abandoned in the desert wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Graybird's weathered face softened into a rare smile. "Good woman, you're Anna. Wise spirit." "Yes," Samuel agreed. "She would have loved this place, these people, what we've started building here." Silent Elk studied him carefully. "And when others go to Oregon, what then for Samuel Thornton?" It was the question that had occupied Samuel's thoughts for weeks now. The answer came with surprising clarity. "My path is here," he said simply. "Someone needs to remain as bridge between worlds, to show what's possible when we see beyond our fears." Graybird nodded approvingly. "Good medicine, this truth." She reached into her own pouch and withdrew something small that caught the early spring light, a carved piece of antler shaped into a miniature hammer. "For bridge builder," she said, pressing it into his palm. "Strong tools for strong work." A commotion from the camp drew their attention. Little Emily was running toward them, her face alight with excitement. "Mr. Samuel," she called, "come quick, the baby is coming." Sarah Caulfield had gone into labor with the child she'd been carrying when the wagon train departed, a child whose father had died in St. Louis, who would now be born in this valley between worlds. Samuel exchanged a quick glance with Graybird and Silent Elk before all three hurried back to camp. Hours later, as twilight painted the western sky in brilliant hues, a new cry joined the symphony of the valley, the first child born to this fragile, hopeful community. By unspoken consensus, they gathered outside the teepee, where Sarah had delivered a healthy baby girl. When the new mother emerged exhausted but radiant, she carried her swaddled daughter to where Samuel stood with the others. "I want to name her Anna," Sarah said softly. "After your wife, if that's all right." Samuel's throat tightened with emotion he couldn't express. He could only nod, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Anna Thornton Caulfield," Sarah continued. "The first child of our new beginning." As if responding to her name, the infant opened her eyes, staring up at the gathering with the unfocused wonder of the newly born. In that moment, looking into those innocent eyes that knew nothing of the divisions and hatreds of the world she had entered, Samuel felt something he had thought permanently extinguished the day the wagon train disappeared over the horizon and left him to die: hope. Later that night, as the celebration continued around the fires, Samuel slipped away to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. He took Anna's locket from around his neck and opened it, studying her face in the moonlight. "I think I've kept my promise," he whispered to her image. "I've built something that matters, something that might last beyond me." A small figure approached Emily, clutching something in her hands. "Mr. Samuel, I made this for you." She held out a folded piece of birch bark on which she had painstakingly drawn 3 figures, holding hands, one clearly in buckskins, one in a settler's dress and a smaller figure between them. Beneath the drawing were childish letters in both English and Lakota. "Thank you for saving us." Samuel accepted the gift with gentle hands. "It's beautiful, Emily. Thank you." She pointed to the figures. "That's you, and that's Graybird, and that's me in the middle." Her face grew serious. "Mama says you're staying when we leave for Oregon." "Yes," Samuel confirmed. "My place is here now." Emily considered this with the solemn deliberation of childhood. "I think I want to stay too. I like it here. I have friends." She gestured toward the Lakota children she had been playing with for months. "And I'm learning their words, and they're learning mine." Samuel smiled at her simple wisdom. "That's how bridges are built, Emily. One word at a time." She nodded, satisfied with this answer, then scampered back to the celebration. Samuel carefully tucked her drawing into his shirt pocket next to the locket. 2 treasures representing his past and a future he had never imagined possible. The sun dipped below the western peaks, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds that reflected off the lingering snow in the valley. In the gathering darkness, campfires winked to life, no longer separate blazes for settlers and Lakota, but a single circle of light pushing back the encroaching night. Samuel Thornton stood at the threshold between worlds, not fully belonging to either, yet essential to both. The elderly settler, cast out for slowing the wagon train left to die in the merciless desert, had found not just survival, but purpose. And in that purpose, redemption. He fingered the carved hammer Graybird had given him, feeling its perfect weight in his palm. A tool for building, not destroying. A symbol of the work that lay ahead. "Old path ends," he murmured, echoing Silent Elk's words from what seemed a lifetime ago. "New path begins." Behind him, the joined camp celebrated new life, with songs in 2 languages that somehow harmonized despite their differences. Ahead, The unknown future waited with both challenges and promises. And Samuel Thornton, bridge builder, stepped forward to meet it.